Okay, so we're trying to think about how to integrate GLAD and some of our E3 tools, and these are just some preliminary ideas that we thought we would share. So I've seen a lot of people using the CCD to define, so let's do that now. So I'm going to go into a teacher mode. Okay, so our word for today is say it with me.
Cross-cultural communication.
Great. Cross-cultural communication is a way to display cultural resiliency. So now I'm going to have you talk to a partner, talk at your table. What are your predictions about the meaning of cross-cultural communication? But before we do that, I need to know how many of you have heard the phrase cross-cultural communication? Thanks. So I'm going to have you turn to a partner. Talk about your predictions for the meaning of cross-cultural communication. Go. Okay, so I had you talk to each other to come up with some predictions of the meaning of cross-cultural communication, which is a way that we can show cultural resiliency. So you had some very interesting predictions. One of them was communicating between cultures is a form of cross-cultural communication. Speaking different languages is a form of cross-cultural communication. So now we're going to settle on our final definition. Our final meaning, and I'm taking this from page 8 of the E3 notebook, is experiences that require one person to code switch. Code switch. How many of you have heard code switch before? If you've heard code switch before, talk to a partner. What context did you hear that? What were we talking about when we talked about code switching? So I'm going to give an example. And I'm going to give an example that's based on the socially constructed categories of diversity, which comes from page 12. So for instance, if we're talking across race, that might be a situation that requires code switching. If a Spanish speaker is talking to an English speaker, that might be a situation that requires code switching. So let's say this definition together.
Cross-cultural communication.
Experiences that require a person to code switch. Okay. So now what I'd like you to do is talk at your table and construct one sentence using the word cross-cultural communication. Go. Okay, there are two places where I have evidence that you as students have worked together in order to understand the definition of cross-cultural communication. One place is when I look at your background knowledge, which means have you heard or not heard this word? The other place is when we have your oral sentence. So now I'm going to ask for your oral sentences that use the word cross-cultural communication. Stepping out of teacher mode into training. This is where I'm going to check off however many sentences I get. So these check marks are my evidence that students have used this keyword. Because if all I see here is teacher writing, then what I know is that the teacher has used the word, but I do not know that the students have used the word. Also, this can serve to remind the student, oh yeah, I did know what that word meant. We did use it in a sentence. So it's sort of a cue for them also.
Why don't we write the sentence down?
We don't write the sentence down because this is an oral language activity. So we're registering that yes, they made the sentence, but we're not going to imprint student sentences with this phrase because we want it to be open. So what I'm imprinting instead is the idea, oh yeah, I have used that word before. Check mark, check mark, check mark. So plus, the Cognitive Content Dictionary is an oral language, focused motivation and oral language tool. So
this oral sentence is very important.
the oral
Shouldn't be
sentence
left
is
out.
super important and should not be left out. Now, there are multiple ways that we could incorporate it, but again, this box right here and this box right here shows me that somebody other than the teacher used this word, that students used it. And my goal is really for students to use this vocabulary, not for me to use it. So I'm going to document their oral sentences, as many as I get, however many that is. I'm going to document if they've heard the word or not heard the word, because that's accessing their prior knowledge. After I've presented a definition of this word and we've made some sentences, and or an alternate way to explore these concepts is to use the T-graph for social skills. Now, critical analysis isn't necessarily a social skill. I get that. I totally get it. But what this is going to provide us with is this is going to provide students with some examples of what it looks like and what it sounds like. Now, if you've used this tool before, you know it's really hard for kids to come up with these examples. So you're going to have to help them. That's okay. So what I would do is here I would say, all right, our term for today, the way in which we are going to talk about how we show brilliance is cross-cultural communication. Say that with me.
Cross-cultural communication.
So talk to a partner. What does cross-cultural communication mean to you? Go. After they come back, the students are going to come back and they're going to tell me what cross-cultural communication means to them. They might say it means multiple languages, or it means talking white, or it means something else, right? So I'm going to write down whatever they say around cross-cultural communication. Now I'm going to ask them to give me some examples of what cross-cultural communication looks like. What does cross-cultural communication look like? My recommendation is then we go to page 12 to the socially constructed dynamics of diversity, and we use some of these things as our examples. So for instance, cross-cultural communication looks like, oh, I gotta use blue, because my looks like are blue. Looks like people of different races talking to each other. It also looks like an adult talking to a child. It also looks like a person who speaks Spanish and a person who speaks Oromo talking to each other. So each of these examples are things that could represent cross-cultural communication and what it looks like. So I'm giving them a picture. So I'm going to write a little note here: across race, across age, across language. Could also be across gender. Because our socially constructed identities have a language that go with them. And so when we talk across those identities, we are using cross-cultural communication. So the harder one is, what does it sound like? What does cross-cultural communication sound like? We know from our definition, it sounds like code switching. Which is me moving out of whatever my primary way of talking is and adjusting to my audience. So what else does it sound like? It could sound like opening multiple language channels so that when you are, if you are a native speaker of Spanish or a native speaker of Somali or a native speaker of Hmong, and I ask you to do a turn and talk, if you have a partner in your room who also speaks that language, you two could talk together in your home language, and then when you come back to the group, if you were sharing out, you could share out using English, which is the language of the classroom. Another thing that looks like cross-cultural communication is monitoring pronoun preference. I'm a bad speller, make mistakes, I let kids correct me. So that I know, are you a person who uses she pronouns, he pronouns, or they pronouns? So those are a few examples of what cross-cultural communication or effective cross-cultural communication would sound like. Now, we have the trees. So somewhere in my classroom, I have a tree. My tree is very sad because I'm a lazy teacher. So I'm saying that about myself. I'm not putting that on anybody. I'm saying that about me. So I just put together brown paper to make a trunk. I color photocopied my goal, my target value, or my target cultural resiliency for this week, which is going to be cross-cultural communication. And then I made some green leaves to go on my tree. And I used the pattern in the E3 book. So then, at the end of my lessons, I'm going to go back to our cross-cultural communication chart and say to my students, think to yourself, how did I show cross-cultural communication today in our class? Did I use that brilliance of my cultural resiliency? Yes, I did, as a matter of fact. I showed cross-cultural communication because I helped a classmate who speaks Spanish by translating the question to her and talking it over with her in Spanish. Great. So then I'm going to put my name on here. And I'm going to take a leaf and I'm going to add it to our tree. And then another student, and another, right? So we're going to put our names on these leaves because this is primarily an oral language activity. I'm not asking them to write on the back, how did you do this? Although you certainly could. And then I'm going to have these added to our tree. But what I'm trying to do is connect this tree that we've used with our weekend reflection or we've used with other things to our lessons and how we're presenting ourselves in class every day. So in this particular sense, I might be looking at cross-cultural communication. Now, after we've gone through the CCD process and maybe the TGRAPH for social skills process, I can freely have many of these attributes up here, and students can say, oh, well, I used adaptability because I didn't have a pencil and I asked for a pencil from my neighbor and was able to move forward with the lesson. Okay, there's my adaptability leaf. I might put it on, whatever branch. So this is an idea for how to incorporate some of the GLAD strategies. So we have the CCD, we have the TGRAPH for social skills, and then this is kind of a hybrid of team points from the TGRAPH for social skills and literacy awards, because it's going to have my name on it. It's my accomplishment. So in that sense, it's an individual that I'm going to put on the tree.
And you're using this as an oral strategy because they do not get the leaf until they tell you what they did.
Exactly. So then we're having to use oral language. We're having to talk about cross-cultural communication, having to think about how I used it. And then if you can do all of that and give it to me in an oral response, a leaf goes up on the tree in your name. Thank you. Please share your ideas with us. Have a great day.